Well, right now, there are over 68 million people around the world who've been forcibly displaced, and 25 million of whom are refugees. Calculating the number of illegal immigrants is far more complicated, and the solution is anything but straightforward. Joining me this evening from Germany to discuss the issue is Axel Steyer. He's the co-founder of Mission Lifeline, an international aid group which carries out migrant rescues at sea. In Melbourne, I'm joined by Fadak Alfayadh, an Iraqi refugee who settled in Australia as a young girl and now works as a community lawyer. And in Sydney, Tom Switzer, the Executive Director at the Centre for Independent Studies. Nice to have all of you with us. And Tom, I wanted to go to you first because what we've seen in the United States play out this week, and it's created headlines around the world and really created a lot of emotion in the United States, has been the cost, the human cost, the impact of a tough immigration, tough border policy. How do you implement a tough border policy in a humane way?
Well, it's a very delicate issue, and Trump has been forced into a retreat on this issue just in the last 24 hours. There's no question that Trump has been politically and emotionally on the wrong side of this debate on this issue of removing children from their parents in border custody. You had his own wife, Melania, come out and disagree with him. The former First Lady, Barbara Bush, wrote a scathing piece in the Washington Post. The Pope has come out attacking Trump again. And even when Trump came out denouncing immigrants, saying that they're infesting the country, you had Republican lawmakers speaking out against them. And that's forced Trump into this humiliating back down. But look, Stan, the issue you raise is a good one. The cold, hard reality is that although the broad cross-section of European political leaders may detest Donald Trump, increasingly a lot of European voters agree with Trump in the imperative of tough border protection. The question here is, how do you balance concern for human rights with territorial national integrity? It
is a critical one. And Axel, that goes to the dilemma of Germany, doesn't it? Because Angela Merkel tried that approach, said, look, I'm opening the borders, come in. And we've seen a political backlash. And Tom, to an extent, is right, isn't he? People are turning out and they are voting on this issue. How do you walk that line, Axel, particularly in Germany, given the pressure that Angela Merkel is under?
I mean, we rescue people from sea, unworthy boats, so it's a matter of life or death. We hand out life vests, we bring them to a safe port, maybe, and this is the point we have to have in our mind. We have to respect the international law. We have to respect the International Geneva Convention, and which is signed almost every state. So we have to keep this, and this is what we do.
But Fadak, you have faced a backlash yourself. Mission Lifeline has been criticised and attacked by those who don't want to see this more open policy of bringing refugees there. So while you're doing the humane work, the reality is, despite the UN Convention, people are saying that they don't necessarily want to see so many refugees turning up and opening up their borders. That's the political reality, isn't it? Sorry, Fadak. Sure. Axel, and then I'll come to you. Axel?
I mean, we have to see that on the first important thing is that we lose the respect in front of the international law if we don't let the people in, because they have the right to flee and they have the right to claim asylum, and this is the main point, and they have the right to live. And I'm sure Ms. Merkel, you know, she agree in that, and most of the political leaders have to see that this is a stability of Europe is very close connected to the respect of law.
It's a terrible bind, Fadak, because anyone looking at the images of those children couldn't help but be moved. Anyone seeing the images of people fleeing war can't help but be moved. But we still have this issue, don't we? And you've been a refugee. From where you sit, watching the debate right now, watching the hardening of attitudes and the political imperative of having to control borders, how do you balance these things?
Absolutely. Look, Stan, everyone deserves a safe home. Everyone deserves protection. And in my work with refugees, but also with Australian communities, in my speaking tour, I've seen exactly that people value giving asylum seekers a safe home, a safe haven. And, you know, these people are coming to our shore asking for protection and nothing else. And I don't think it's anything that we need to be worried about. It's just a matter of creating safe passages.
I want to come to Tom in a minute, Fadak, but can I just follow that up? It's not necessarily a question of saying, is it that people want to welcome refugees or that refugees shouldn't find a home, but how do you decide who comes, how they come, who is turned away? These are hard political realities, aren't they? Not everyone can come, and we know that.
Absolutely. And look, Australia definitely knows that. We have very, very stringent and difficult immigration and asylum seeking policies, actually, whether it be that people want to come here for work or a holiday or to seek asylum. It's actually a very long and tedious process. So I think in Australia, we have nothing to be worried about in terms of, you know, who comes here and who doesn't. We're already very, very strict. And yeah, look, it is about our values. What kind of country do we want to be viewed as on a global level? Do we want to be welcoming people who are asking for protection, or do we want to simply follow right-wing policies?
And this is the problem now, isn't it, Tom? I mean, in a sense, the UN Convention on Refugees, is it even fit for purpose now, given the times that we are living under, the open borders, globalisation, the flow of people, the impact of war, the sheer numbers we are dealing with right now?
Yeah, Stan, I'll get back to something that the then Prime Minister John Howard said at the height of the Tampa asylum seeker standoff in August, September of 2001. He was mocked at the time, but he resonated with a lot of voters when he said, "We will determine who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come." What you're seeing right now, all across Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe and Western Europe, you're seeing many populist politicians on the right talking that language on steroids. Because remember, when John Howard put in place those tough border protection policies in 2001, 2002, the next 5 years of his government, the legal immigration rate actually doubled, and we had a controlled, properly orderly refugee migrant intake of something like 12,000 a year, which was one of the highest in the world per capita. So we had confidence in the system. You don't have that confidence right now across Europe.
Fadak, I know I want to come to you, Axel, in just a moment, but Fadak, you were shaking your head to that. I don't think you liked hearing what Tom had to say about John Howard and John Howard's approach. But does the point not remain, though, that it is confidence in the system? You can increase immigration when you have confidence in the way that the system operates.
Absolutely. And look, we can do the exact same thing. I mean, I agree that we should have policies and structures so that we can make sure that people who seek asylum can find safety and find it in Australia. And we can absolutely do that through creating safe passages so that people can come and be settled here without having to put themselves in danger. And we can determine, you know, the numbers and where people come from. And we do that now. I mean, we settle people through the humanitarian program, and it works very, very well.
Axel, can you give us a sense, I mean, you're involved in rescuing people, bringing people to Germany. Given the tense political situation that we're seeing playing out there, give us a sense of the human impact of this. The people that you rescue, how do they build a life and find a life in Germany with this backdrop of the political tension?
Well, you see, in Germany, it's the AfD, it's a right-wing party. They have about between 15 and 20%, but it's not the majority. The majority is very open to refugees, but you see all these populistic guys very often in the media, and they tell everybody, wow, the refugees, problem. And this is not real. We see people held back in Libya, in torture camps paid by EU, and this all is, you know, this couldn't be. If we see this right-wing populist actions in Europe, we have to be very, aware to walk behind this line. So because we have to keep the humanitarian act rescuing people, and the politicians should make safe passages, I would say, same, and provide people have to go to the sea to find a safe place.
Tom, it's an issue, isn't it, that's been capitalised on by what we would see as the political right. How does, broadly, the political left then make a case here, given what we've seen with the support, the popularity even, of the political right off the back of the tensions around refugees and immigration?
Well, I think the political left in Europe and indeed in Australia are on the political back foot. I mean, the weight of public opinion is solidly against open borders and illegal immigration flows. And, getting back to the question of Germany, Germany right now is on the cusp of a major political crisis. It is percolating, and it's because Merkel's own coalition is splintering. The Bavarian-based Christian group want tough border protection policies because they represent Bavaria. That is the first port of call for a lot of the illegal immigrants. And Merkel's biggest political mistake since she's been in power in 2005 was the decision in 2015 to allow up to 1 million refugees predominantly from the Middle East. There's been a huge backlash against that. When Tony Abbott allowed 12,000 refugees from Syria, which was more than the Obama administration led into the United States, it was overwhelmingly well received by all sides of politics because you had the confidence in the system. Again, that confidence is lacking all across Europe.
Let me get a response from Zaki on that. Was this the biggest mistake of... Axel on that. Was this the biggest political mistake of Angela Merkel?
You must know the borders in Europe are open, and the refugees have the right to find a country where they can have a safe place. So this was the case, and it was not about border opening because there were no borders. We see now fences in Hungary, and we see in Austria and also in Germany rising right-wing groups which point out that the refugees are the problem. But the real problem for the EU are the right-wing groups and the lack of humanity.
But those right-wing groups, we're talking about, the Alternative for Deutschland, neo-Nazis essentially, they would never have existed politically if it weren't for Merkel's decision.
And I just want to finish, we have under a minute, but I want to give the final word to you here if I can, Fadak. Personally, what has it meant for you to find a home in Australia, to look at the personal impact of this on a human being's life as a refugee?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the conversation recently has been disheartening because there are a lot of people out there talking about refugees and asylum seekers without knowing them, without knowing the human behind the numbers, the story behind the headlines. And that's what I'm seeing in the panellists that you've got in Sydney tonight. Unfortunately, you might not know what we have been through and what we have suffered, but the fact that we are some of the bravest and most resilient people in the world, and that what I've seen in my work is a huge embrace and welcome from various communities towards refugees, and to see that it being about border control rather than humans and humanity is really unfortunate.
And that brings us in at the point that we started, isn't it, Thomas? How do we find a policy that is secure, gives people confidence, and is humane? And we're still searching for that. Look, it's terrific to talk to all of you. Tom, Axel, Fadak, thank you all for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
you.